Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. The ladder back down. We're just trying to go through some of these questions regarding the certified in cybersecurity or certificate in cybersecurity syllabus from the ISC squared. Now, I've emphasized time and time again, including in the advert of this workshop, that this is not a brain dump session. I don't really believe in using brain dumps simply because if you use brain dumps and pass an exam, when you get to an interview and you're questioned on your knowledge, that's where things might unravel a bit. You may find it difficult. But if you actually study and understand the concepts of what you're being taught on these syllabuses, then at least you may have a better chance after you've passed the exam of being able to defend your knowledge at an interview. So let's hear from Mr. Ilori, who sat the exam yesterday, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Ibukun. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Olalikon, like she has said, and I took the exam yesterday, was Friday. So I took the exam yesterday, Friday, and thankfully I passed the exam. So based on my experience with the exam, I found okay, maybe I should talk about my background a bit so that I can put things in context too. So as regards ISC CC exam, I found out about the exam about barely a month ago. But before then, I've spent a little time with IT support, and I've been on Try Hack Me. For those in cybersecurity, there's a website called Try Hack Me. I've gone through their understanding understanding cybersecurity. So, coupled with my little knowledge about IT support I've had before then, I read through the course materials. But I want to say very importantly, as part of my experience, that we should, whoever is taking the cybersecurity, certifying the cybersecurity exam by ISC, should ensure that they go through the course, the self-paced training course that has been made available free of charge by ISC2. My experience is that if you go through the course, curriculum, make sure you watch videos and read the materials and just follow the process step by step on the ISC2 learning site where the course is available. Follow the entire modules, read it. There are about 5 modules. Yes, for the domains, about 6 modules, but the 5 modules, the domains are 5. So just take them from one after the other, follow through the process, watch the introductory video, watch the rig objective. It doesn't really take time. Most of the videos are about 10, 15 minutes. I mean, most of the units of the modules, about 10 to 15 minutes to take. Then they have some podcasts that you can listen to and short video. It's quite interesting to follow through. It's not difficult. So if you can go through the entire CC self-paced training provided, I think it will take you, if you dedicate one domain, per day, in a week you'll be done, and you can do it 2 times. You can read it, go through it, maybe first week, second week, to get it over, if you are a newbie, especially if you're a newbie, if you are just new into the field and you are really, really a greenhorn with cybersecurity or with IT, I think it will do you well if you can just go through the curriculum 2 or 3 times. It's not difficult. If you are dedicated and committed to it, just 1 week you'll be done. Second week, go over it again. Third week, but if you are an experienced, if you had a background in IT support and it's not new to you, going through it once will give you sufficient, practice or sufficient knowledge about what is expected. My experience is that the exam itself, the test itself, is solely from that course, from that training. If you do that training, everything covered in the exam I could remember where and when in the course that those questions came out from. So, but it's very important that we understand it and not just cram the concepts, because you have an option of downloading the PDF. There's a little PDF for every of the chapters treated. There are PDFs that you can download. Don't just download the resource and read and go, especially if you're a newbie. Don't just download the resource. Watch the classes, do the online thing, the video introduction, the video explanations, the materials online, read through. It covers completely the questions that will come out. So, but if you don't understand it, if you don't read to understand, when you are attending to the questions being asked in the test, you might get confused because they will not repeat the practice questions that you have in the self-paced training in the main exam. So if you take the practice questions, there are always a quiz at the end of every chapter you read. There's a quiz, about 20 minutes quiz. The quiz will adequately refresh and get you ready. And then there's a general quiz at the end of the entire, entire course online. The quiz is the same timing with the test that you're going to take, the real test. So, and you have the privilege of taking this quiz as many times as possible. You can take it unlimited times. So if you take the quiz, if you don't pass it, if you don't get enough scores, you can start all over again, take the quiz again, take the quiz until you get, sufficient score, maybe 90 and above, because they're actually quite straightforward. So my experience, the submission I'm going to make to everyone is, please just, even if you have read any other material before, ensure you go through this self-paced training course. It's sufficient to prepare you for the exam. But if you now have to add some other things, you want to expose yourself to other materials there, you can take, like I mentioned earlier, like the course that Mrs. Ibukun will talk about later on, information security, that will also help. Then you can do the try ACME, understanding cybersecurity too. That will give you a foundational knowledge. The exam is basically testing your foundation in cybersecurity. It's foundation in IT, information security. So you need to if you're new, the terminologies may be a bit confusing at the first time. That's why I said you should read it like 2 or 3 times, because the terminology may not be something you are used to. But if you've been into IT when I mean IT, I mean real IT, maybe networking kind of IT. If you have been into that for maybe a year, you should have been familiar with things like ports, local area networking, all these networking terminology. I think that will be quite sufficient. And another thing I found that from the questions that have been asked by people, a lot of people find it difficult to navigate their way through the training on the website of ISC. So maybe that's another part, because people keep asking me, where do they get these resources? Where can I get resources? So maybe later in this meeting, we can give a little bit of pointers to how you can navigate your way around the ISC2 website, so that you can find the courses, the self-paced training courses, and go through it. I think that's all I will say for now. I'll wait for questions and questions and answers time, so that I can attend to other things.
So here are some of the practice questions from the ISC Squares website that they've put there. And so if you've actually been through the syllabus, it would be interesting to see what you think about this. And again, this is covered in the Information Security Management Principles syllabus for the other exam provider. Now, the payment card industry, PCI, is a committee made up of representatives from major credit card providers. And they rule that merchants must follow, if they choose to accept payment via credit card, certain rules. And it says, it now explains that these rules describe best practices for securing credit card processing technology and how to protect customers' personal data. What is the PCI Council? And I don't want to name, what is the answer here? What are those rules called? Are they called a law, a policy, a standard, or a procedure? And if we can just put our answers in the chat window, please. So we just put our answers in the chat window. We're on question 1, and the question is, what is the PCI Council regulations referred to as? So if we just put the letter A, B, C, or D there, please. Law, someone said it's a law, someone said it's a standard. What else? C, Kemi says C, standard. I've got a lot of C's. Okay, yes. So the answer is actually C, the PCI DSS. That is what the full terminology is called. The PCI Council issues a standard that merchants must follow. It's not a law. It describes best practices. So if something is describing best practices, then it can't be a law. If it's describing a legal obligation, then it would be a law. Governments issue policies, organizations may issue policies as well, like the acceptable use policy, internet usage policy, and things like that. However, industry issues standards. Can anyone type a different standard that is in use in the that we know of, that is in use in information security? One standard. Can anyone type the name of another standard, please? Any other standards that we know besides the PCI DSS? Yep, ISO, that's fantastic. ISO 27001, that's the one that I was looking for. Information security standards for information security management systems, ISO 27001. There's also ISO 27005, which is for risk management. There's ISO 9001, which is for a quality management system in an organization. Those are standards. The PCI DSS is a standard for organizations that process credit card payments. There are rules that organizations that process credit card payments have to follow. Now let's just go down a bit to the next question on their website. And please remember that these aren't questions that you will have in your exam. Rather, they're practice questions that are openly available on ISC2's website, which is why we're tackling them here today. Now we're saying that Freenall is selling a used laptop in an online auction and has estimated value of the laptop to be $100, but has seen other laptops of similar type and quality sell for both more and less than that amount. Freenall is hoping that their laptop will sell for $100 or more, but is prepared to take less for their laptop if nobody bids up to $100. This is an example of what? Risk tolerance, risk inversion, a threat, or a vulnerability. Let's type the answers in the chat box, please. Thank you. So they're preparing to sell their laptop for a set price, but they're thinking, well, if it doesn't sell for that, I'm prepared to take a bit less. What is that an example of? Risk inversion, a threat, a vulnerability, or risk tolerance? Yep, so everyone's actually got that right. Risk tolerance. They're prepared to tolerate a lesser price. There's no such thing as risk inversion. And can somebody actually type in the chat box what a threat is? A threat, and what a vulnerability is. I'm looking for one word, please, for a vulnerability. An information security vulnerability, if we type that in the chat window, and then what a threat is. What is a threat? Yep. Vulnerability is a weakness of a system that can be exploited. Thank you, Kenny. That's fantastic. Exposure. Yes, a weakness. Thank you. A weakness that can be exploited. Yep. What is a threat, everyone? Okay. Imminent exploitation. Is it really imminent? A threat may not be imminent. A threat is an intention to cause harm, a potential danger. That's good. Potential danger, but a threat may or may not be imminent. A threat is something that can be harmful to a system. Absolutely. It's anything that can cause harm to your systems. Can an internal user be a threat? An internal trusted user. An internal trusted user, can they be a threat? Yes. Okay. Francis has given us a very good response there, saying yes, because they are aware of the vulnerabilities. What other way, though, can they be a threat? Because what you're saying there is if they're aware of vulnerabilities, that they can actually be a threat. But what other way can they be a threat? By what other means can they be a threat? You're saying if they're aware of vulnerabilities, they can be a threat. But is there any other way by which an internal user, exactly, mistakes, errors, I'd say that that is one of the most common methods or ways of which an internal user may be a threat. They may click on a link that is sent to them without actually taking time to consider what the link may contain or that it may be malicious. An internal user may also not check an email address to verify that it actually is spelt correctly. For example, an internal user that is used to dealing with a customer from the ladder back down or with emails from the ladder back down, they may not notice that the email that has been sent to them has come from ladderbackdwn.com instead of down.com. So errors, that is one means by which users often tend to pose a threat to organizations. But we got this question correct. So let's now take a look at the next question. Tina is an ISC2 member and is invited to join an online group of IT security enthusiasts. After attending a few online sessions, Tina learns that some participants are sharing malware with each other in order to use it against other organizations online. What should Tina do? Nothing? Should she stop participating in the group? Should she report the group to law enforcement or report the group to ISC2? What should they do? Okay, so this is a split, this is really a split response here. So now someone has said report to the ISC2 because of the, because of the ethics provisions. Someone said, well, some people have said report the group to law enforcement. Some people have said stop participating in the group. And some people have said do nothing. Now, what's interesting is that if this is an ISC2 group, then I would say report to the ISC2. If it is a group, a group, just online outside of the ISC2, I would, number one, stop participating in the group. And if there were other responses, if it were a case of choose two, then I would report the group to law enforcement. So in the UK, we've got something like the NCA, National Crime Agency. So I'd just file an online report. But the ISC2, unless it is actually the ISC2's group, a group within the ISC2's community, then they wouldn't really be able to do anything about it. So I would first of all stop participating in the group, and then I'd file a report with the NCA or another agency because they're threatening to use it against other organizations. But the ISC2 wouldn't be able to do anything about it unless it's a group within their community. Okay, now let's take a look at the next question online. Kirpak works in the security office of a medium-sized entertainment company and is asked to assess a particular threat. And he suggests that the best way to counter this threat would be to purchase and implement a particular security solution. So there's a threat, and the security officer is now saying, let's purchase a new system to counter this threat. So is that risk acceptance? Is it risk avoidance? Is it risk mitigation? Or is it risk transference? Okay, the majority are saying C, which is correct. What is another word, please, for C, for risk mitigation? Risk what? Risk what? Risk, what is that called? Risk mitigation, another word? Thank you, risk reduction. Thanks so much, Helen, there. Risk reduction, absolutely. So that's another word for it. Now, what is risk acceptance? What would Kirpak do if they wanted to accept this risk? They would simply do nothing. They'd accept the risk that, okay, that there's a threat and we're going to not purchase anything. We'll just watch and wait. That is risk acceptance. And sometimes an organization will say, okay, you've recommended this security solution, but we don't have money to purchase that equipment. So we're going to have to accept the risk. And that would then be logged in the corporate risk register with the risk owner signing to say that I have accepted this risk on behalf of the company. Risk avoidance. Can a risk be avoided? Yes, thanks, Francis. You've also said exactly what I've tried to explain there minimally. So you said that they accept the risk because the benefits outweighs the impact. So if actually let's just recite that. Very good response there. If, for example, Kirpak says that the threat, if this threat were to materialize, it would cost the organization £1,000 or $1,000. But the solution that they're proposing that the organization buys is worth £5,000. Then the company would say, we'd rather accept that cost benefits analysis. You do a cost benefits analysis and the company would say, no, we'd rather accept that risk. Now, risk avoidance, how could that risk be avoided? The main way that an organization can avoid a risk is to not continue the activity that has given rise to the threat or the risk. So say, for example, this is an example that I raise in the other workshops that I've delivered for information security management principles. How can a petrol station totally avoid the risk of a fire? The only way that a petrol station can avoid the risk of a fire is to close the petrol station down. So that is risk avoidance. Whereas reducing the risk in a petrol station may involve putting in place those fire extinguishers, putting signs in at the petrol pump saying, do not smoke, turn off your engine, training the petrol attendants in fire safety. Those are all risk mitigation or risk reduction methods. And then we've got risk transference. What is another word for transference, please? If we type that in the chat window, another word for risk transference. Yep, that's it. Fantastic. Insurance. Or there's yet another word where you transfer the risk to another organization. What is another word for risk transference? Insurance. That is the most common method where you transfer the risk to an insurer. So they say that if the risk were to materialize, then you get a certain amount of money. What you're doing there is you're transferring the impact. But how can you transfer the probability of a risk materializing? Any other word for transference? How can we transfer the probability? So when we insure, we transfer the impact, where we're saying that in the event a fire occurs at a petrol station, then we would get money back to reduce the impact of that fire on our operations, to reduce the loss in revenue. What is another word for transference? And let me help us all by saying it starts with an O. O for Oscar. O for Oscar. To transfer the probability of the risk materializing in the first case. Okay, I'll give us another letter. O, U. U for umbrella. O, U. When you transfer the risk to another company of the probability of okay, let me just give us the answer. Yeah, so OU and then T actually is the third letter, but it's outsourcing. When you outsource an activity, you could outsource it to a company that has got more specialism in carrying out that activity. So when you transfer, for example, your, let's say your email gateway scanning. So before emails come into your company, they're actually scanned by a company like Mimecast or one of those companies that has that specialism in doing that. What you're doing is you're transferring the risk to them. You're outsourcing that activity to that company because they're better at doing that and they're leaving you to focus on your core business operations. So outsourcing is another means of transferring a risk. And I know that some of us may think, well, most companies actually outsource to reduce costs, which is absolutely correct. However, outsourcing can be used as another means of transferring the risk. So you don't have to hire your team or buy in solutions or software to actually do that work for you. You can transfer that risk to a specialist company. Now, there's another question here. Triffids Corporation has a rule that all employees working with sensitive hard copy documents must put the documents into a safe at the end of the workday, where they're locked up until the end of the following workday. What kind of control is the process, emphasis on the word process, of putting the documents into the safe? So the question isn't what kind of control is the safe? The question is, what kind of control is the process of putting the documents into the safe, actually physically putting them into the safe? Is it an administrative control? Is it a tangential control? Is it a physical control? Or is it a technical control? Thank you. Okay, the majority are saying A, and we've got one C. And I gave us a clue by saying that actually that the question isn't asking what kind of control is the safe. If we're asking what kind of control is the safe, then that is a physical control. But the question is asking what kind of control is the process of putting the documents into the safe, which is what makes the answer A. It's an administrative control. There's nothing called a tangential control, to my knowledge, but it's an administrative control. The physical control is the safe itself. Okay, the same company has a policy that all employees must receive security awareness instruction before using email. They want to make employees aware of potential phishing attempts that the employees might receive via email. What kind of control is this instruction again? Yep, it's a policy, it's a rule. So what kind of control is it? Good observation there. What kind of control is that, please? Yep, it's again an administrative control. It's an instruction, a policy. Right, now, very interesting question here. Which of the following is an example of something you are authentication? Now, please remember that some of these questions were sent to me by someone, and some of them may actually have a label on the answer that the person selected. I've removed their name, may have a blue label over the answer that they selected, which doesn't make the answer right, by the way. So please don't, when we get down to those questions, please don't select those questions because they may or may not be right. So which of the following is an example of something you are, of a something you are authentication factor? A credit card presented to you to a cash machine, your password and PIN number, a user ID, or a photograph of your face? Which of these is something you are? Okay, thank you. I've received quite a lot of D's, and that is correct. So with biometric authentication, there is what we refer to as the 3 methods also of biometric authentication: something you are, something you have, something you know, and then there are other minor ones. But something you are here is your appearance, a photograph of your face. User ID is, and a credit card is something you have that is used to authenticate you. Whereas your password and PIN is something you what? If we just type there, something you what? Your password and PIN, what is that? Something you what? Thank you, Helen. Something you know. Your password and your PIN number is something that you know rather than have, because you don't have it physically. Whereas your password and PIN, sorry, your credit card, it's something you have. Now your user ID, if it's a physical ID, then that is something you have. Whereas your password and PIN is always something that you know and something that only you should know. Your passwords, your PIN number, never ever share your password with anyone. Thank you. Now, Glenn is an ISC2 member, receives an email from a company offering a set of answers for an ISC2 certification exam. What should Glenn do? So receives an offer for brain dumps. What should Glenn do? What do you think they should do? Do nothing, inform ISC2, inform law enforcement, inform Glenn's employer. Absolutely. Inform ISC2. So we have to follow the law. We shouldn't be looking for brain dumps, because again, I find it more valuable when we go through sessions like this, where we're just discussing, explaining why each answer is correct or why each answer is wrong, rather than just simply reading dumps, going into the exam, passing or failing, and coming out no wiser than you were before you started reading those brain dumps. Question 9, which of these would probably not be considered a threat? A threat now. A natural disaster, unintentional damage to the system caused by a user, a laptop with sensitive data on it, an external attacker trying to gain unauthorized access to the environment. Which of these is not a threat? And we've received, I think most people are agreed that it's C. But what is the laptop then with sensitive data on it? Remember, we've said that users can pose threats by way of error. Yes, exactly. Shakirada has answered that. Very correct. That's a vulnerability. You've got sensitive data on something. If it's insecure or something, then it's got a vulnerability on it. Right now, we've got to the point whereby these questions, they have someone's chosen answer, but there's no saying whether those answers are right or wrong. Sophia is visiting Las Vegas and decides to put a bet on a particular number on a roulette wheel. What are they doing? Are they accepting the risk that their money is going to go? Are they avoiding the risk? Are they reducing the risk, or are they transferring the risk? Yep, thank you. Everyone's agrees that is accepting the risk that they may lose their money. Chad is a security practitioner tasked with ensuring, and I'm not saying again whether these answers selected by the person that provided these questions legitimately from the ISC2 site, whether these answers are right or wrong. Security practitioner tasked with ensuring that the information on the organization's public website is not changed by anyone outside the organization. Is this task an example for ensuring confidentiality, integrity, availability, or confirmation? Now, what is that an example of? Ensuring that the information is not changed by the, and that is a really tricky question, actually. Yep, that's a tricky question. And it is B. Why is it not A, please? Could anyone say what, in the chat box, what confidentiality is? Or why is that answer not A? Anyone want to try it in the chat window, please? Why is that answer not A? What one word here would have made this answer A instead of, would have made it confidentiality instead of integrity? Let's just see if someone can provide us with that answer. So Chad is a security practitioner tasked with ensuring that the information on the organization's public website is not changed by anyone outside the organization. This task is an example of ensuring what? Ensuring confidentiality or integrity. Why is it not confidentiality? Why is confidentiality not the answer? Well, yes. So some of us are getting the correct answer, but exactly. Confidentiality, the one word that would have changed this answer is ensuring that the information on the organization's public website is not accessed by anyone outside the organization. But they've said it's not changed. So that's what makes it integrity. If this answer were to be, if this question were to be switched around and they were saying that Chad is tasked with ensuring that the public website is not accessed, or that data is not accessed by anyone outside or inside the organization, then that means that that answer that they're looking for is confidentiality. But when it talks about altering information or changing information, then the answer would be, of course, integrity, because integrity is about making sure that information is not altered or changed by an unauthorized person. Okay. Now let's move to the next question. The senior leadership of a company decides that the best way to minimize liability for the company is to demonstrate the company's commitment to adopting best practices recognized throughout the industry. The company issues a document that explains that Trifid will follow the best practices published by SANS. SANS is an organization that addresses computer and information security. And if we want to sign up to SANS for emails and just for publications on information security, then just go to sans.org and sign up to them. But the Trifid document is a what, and the SANS document are what? So is the Trifid document that has been issued by management, is that a law? And is the publication or the publications that are issued by SANS policies? Or is the Trifid document a policy and the SANS document a standard? Or is it policy and law? Or is it procedure and procedure? What is the answer to that? Oh, sorry, I've actually scrolled down a bit too fast. So what is, yeah, okay, well, we've all seen that. So I'll just say, so the document that the senior leadership of Trifid have issued is explaining that Trifid will follow the best practices. They're saying that this is our policy. We will follow the best practices published by SANS. That is a policy. So they've got a policy in terms of the practices that the organization will follow. And the publication in which the SANS has talked about the best practices, industry best practices. Those are standards. They're not a law. They're standards. And that's what makes this answer B. The TRIFID document that has been issued by management is a policy, and the SANS documents where they've talked about industry best standards and security best standards, they are referred to as security and industry best practices are referred to as standards. Okay, oopsie daisy, I keep going too far. Which of the following probably poses the most risk? A high likelihood and a high impact event, a high likelihood and a low impact event, a low likelihood, high impact event, or a low likelihood, high impact event? Which one of these poses the most risk to an organization? That is clear that if an incident has a high likelihood of occurring, a security breach, for example, has a high likelihood of occurring, and it would have a high impact on the organization's operations, then of course that poses more risk than an event that has a low likelihood but may cause a high impact. So high is definitely a red risk on most organizations' risk register or RAG register, red, amber, green register, and that would be treated rather than accepted. Which of these risks actually might be accepted by an organization? So please listen to that question, which isn't what question 13 is asking. Which of these risks might be accepted by an organization? Is it a high likelihood, high impact, high likelihood, low impact, low likelihood, high impact, or low likelihood, low impact event? Yep, thank you. So the low likelihood, low impact event would be accepted by most organizations. However, it still needs to be included in the corporate risk register. And once it's included in the corporate risk register, that would still be subject to monitoring, maybe occasional monitoring, maybe very periodic monitoring, maybe annual monitoring, just to review that risk. Why should a low likelihood, low impact event be recorded, just documented somewhere in a risk register? Can someone put in the chat window why a low likelihood, low impact event still needs to be recorded? I'll just give us a moment to type. Just giving us a moment to type our answers. Why would a low likelihood, low impact event need to be recorded in the risk register? If anyone's typing, could you just put your hands up so that I can know if anyone is typing at all? And if no one's typing, yes, thank you, Bolaho and FL, because we need to monitor it so we ensure that the risk doesn't escalate or change. We could assess that risk today, and it could be low likelihood, low impact. And 6 months down the road, we suddenly realize, okay, that the likelihood has increased. So it's now become a high likelihood, medium impact event, in which case we then need to reassess and decide whether we want to treat the risk or continue to accept the risk. So we've got some good answers here as well to inform future risks. Yes, because there might be a linkage between this risk and a future risk that emerges. So we need to just keep an eye on things, but we wouldn't monitor or review as regularly as we would with our high likelihood, high impact risks. And there is a remote possibility, of course, or probability that they could become high risk in future. Oops. When is Okay, what I'll do is, this doesn't matter. Within the organization, who can identify risk? And we've all seen the answer there. Anyone. It's every single person's responsibility to identify risk and to flag those risks within the company. Don't say that you note a risk and then you simply say, well, it's not in my job description. It's everyone's responsibility, or I'm not a risk manager. It's everyone's responsibility to identify risk. And a lot of organizations have actually started to include risk in every single employee's job description or role profile, so that everyone understands that, yes, it is your responsibility to identify a risk. Okay, Siobhan is an ISC2 member who works for this company as a security analyst, got a parking ticket while shopping after work. What should they do? What should they do? They should simply pay the parking ticket. Absolutely. That is not a professional matter at all. You get a parking ticket, you pay the parking ticket. Okay, this company publishes a strategic overview of the company's intention to secure all the data the company holds. The document is signed by Trifid senior management. What kind of document is this? What kind of document is this? So the corporation publishes a strategic overview of the company's intention to secure all the data the company possesses. What kind of document is this? Okay, any more answers, please? Absolutely, it is A. I was thinking that some people might be tempted to say it was B because of the because this was highlighted as B initially by the owner of this paper. However, it's not B, it is indeed a policy. Senior management issue policies. They've signed it. It's not a procedure manual, it's not a procedure, rather it's policy signed by senior management. Okay. Okay, let's just go here. Grampan Municipal Code requires that all companies that operate within city limits will have a set of processes to ensure employees are safe while working with hazardous materials. Trifid Corporation creates a checklist of activities employees must follow while working with these dangerous materials. The municipal code is a what, and the Trifid checklist is a what. Okay, so the checklist is a what, first of all, and well, let's go through the checklist. What is the checklist, first of all? Because that will help us to answer this question. Okay, so the checklist is a procedure, so that makes this answer what then? Yep, exactly. So I think most of us have got the correct answer there. It is the checklist is not a standard. The checklist is not a law. The checklist is not, well, so it's not any of these three basically. So the Grampan, they've issued a law or regulation, and so Grampan, the company rather, Trifid, they've now issued a procedure that everyone must follow in the company. Yep. So that makes only one answer possible. Steve is a security practitioner assigned to come up with a protective measure for ensuring that cars don't collide with pedestrians. what is probably the most effective type of control for this task? What is it? What is the most type of control for this task? Okay, yep, some people have started typing before I've even asked the question. What sort of controls? So everyone said physical. What type of controls might Steve design to ensure that cars don't collide with pedestrians? What type of controls? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so when I meant, sorry, need to make myself clear. What type of physical controls? Yep, barricades, zebra crossings. So those are all physical controls. Traffic lights, bollards, yes, thank you. Fences, yes. So all of these are actually physical controls rather than administrative controls. Remember, oh, sorry, they're all technical controls rather than physical controls. So the reason that they're actually saying technical controls, let me just actually go back to that. The reason they're saying technical controls, that a traffic light, for example, so even I would have thought that that would be physical, but a traffic light is actually not a physical control because it's controlled by a technical or software solution. Does that make sense? So if they're saying that, they're actually saying that they want to provide something that, oh, have I moved on to the wrong, sorry, I've moved on to the next question. Sorry, I thought that I just didn't, you know, I thought I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah, so that is definitely physical, but then moving on to the next question, which I've told us about, I've told us the answer now. But for this one, when it comes to ensuring that cars don't collide with pedestrians, then that would definitely be the physical bollards, etc. But then the next question is asking that the city of Grampian wants to know where all its public vehicles are, and it has GPS transmitters installed in all the vehicles, and that is actually a technical control rather than a physical control. So sorry about that bit of confusion. That I just jumped to the next question. I was thinking, okay, that answer doesn't align with what we originally agreed was the answer. Okay, Zama is an ISC2 member and a security analyst for Trifid Corporation. One of their colleagues is interested in getting a certification and asks Zama what the test questions are like. What should Zama do? Yep, so they're saying exactly what we've discussed here. What should they do? They should, it's okay to explain the style and format of the questions, but the minute we start giving actual questions, we're not helping the person asking us for those questions. That's brain dumps. And we're also not abiding by the ethics of the examination provider. So we can explain the style and the format of the questions, but don't provide any further detail. Okay, what is the most important goal of a business continuity effort? And this is something that I'd just like to say to us, that one of the problems that we see in the industry so often is that we always see people saying, I want to move into cybersecurity. I want to move into GRC. But a lot of us don't actually understand that there's a lot of opportunities in operational resilience, of which cybersecurity is just one part of. There's a lot of gaps for professionals in business continuity. There's gaps for professionals in incident management and incident response. So don't focus on cybersecurity, on being a technical person. Don't worry if you're about to sit this exam and you're not a technical person. You haven't worked in IT as a technical person before. It doesn't matter. There are many roles in the industry for risk professionals. Thank you so much for that. Mr. Olalekan said that he's stepping out for another meeting now, so we'll try and do a video and share it through the WhatsApp group. So in group 1, please, thank you. Thanks so much for that. Thank you. So please, if you haven't actually ever, touched anything technical before, don't worry, there is still room for you in our industry. There's definitely room for you in our industry. Just try and focus on areas where you don't require that much technical skills. Now, what is the most important goal of a business continuity effort? This question asks, and I'm going to try not to navigate down too much. Business continuity. What is the most important goal of a business continuity effort? Okay, answers in the chat window, please. More answers, please. Thank you. So we've had some D's and a B and some B's. Okay. Resilience. Okay. Thank you. More answers. Is it to ensure all IT systems function during a potential interruption? Is it to ensure all business activities are preserved during a potential disaster? Is it to ensure the organization survives a disaster, or is it to preserve health and human safety? Okay, someone said it looks like C. Shioma said it's B. B. Okay, now you'll be surprised at the answer, but it is D. In any business continuity effort, if you don't preserve the lives of your employees, you can't preserve the systems. So it's always health and human safety first. That is the most important goal of a business continuity effort, because you could preserve every single system, but if all the employees haven't survived the, whatever the business interruption has been caused by, then, you don't have an organization anyway. So it's definitely D. So in any exam, whether it's, the ISC square exam, whether it's, when you move to doing exams like the CISSP or the CISM or the CISA or the C-RISC, it's always about human life first and foremost, preserving that. Yeah, so D. Which of the following is likely to be included in the business continuity plan? Alternate work areas for staff affected by a natural disaster, the organization's strategic security approach, last year's budget information, or log data from all systems in the business continuity plan. Which of these is the most likely to be included in the BCP? An alternate work area for staff affected by a natural disaster? Or is it the organization's strategic security approach, or log data from all systems? Absolutely, I think most of us have got this correct. It's A. In the business continuity plan, there will be arrangements. Okay, in the event of a business interruption, all staff, all non-critical staff should work from home. All critical staff, all IT staff may need to work from this hot site or this cold site or this warm site. So the answer is definitely A. What is the goal of an incident response effort? Remember, not all of these highlighted responses are correct, because this is someone's first attempt at these questions. What is the goal of an incident response effort? Is it A, no incidents can ever happen? Is it to reduce the impact of incidents on operations, punish wrongdoers, or to save money? Okay, on answer to that, please, can everyone respond? We've got some A's, B's. Which one is the majority? Is the goal of an incident response effort to make sure no incidents ever happen, or to reduce the impact of incidents on operations, or to save money? Those are the three answers that may be. Okay, so we had some people say so that no incidents ever happen, but the majority are correct. It's to reduce the impact of incidents on operations. Everyone recognizes that incidents will happen, but what the regulators in particular are concerned about is, how do you respond when an incident happens to ensure that the impact of those incidents aren't more severe than they should be, and that the duration of the incidents as well aren't as long as they should be, ensuring that organizations are able to recover promptly if they have an incident response process in place that has been what? There is one word that I'm looking for here now that starts with the letter T. What's it important that you do with your incident response plan? Starts with the letter T. The letter T.
Testing.
Thank you. Absolutely. You're 100% correct there. Thank you. So test, ensure that the organization has an incident response plan that hasn't just been documented and then put in a drawer somewhere, that has actually been tested, tried and tested. And each time we test our incident response plan, we then make sure that we update it. We update the incident response plan in case we discover things that we may have done better, lessons learned. So once we've done an incident response test, or a disaster recovery test, or a business continuity test, next thing is we review what we did well during the test and what we didn't do so well, which might require improvements, and then we revamp, we update the incident response plan. Okay, so the idea is the goal of an incident response effort is to reduce the impact of incidents on operations. Which of the following are not typically involved in incident detection? Is it users, security analysts, automated tools, or regulators? Oh, thank you. So yeah, whilst we answer that question, it was really good to read T-Boy's comments there. This is interesting in that an oil company they used to work for, the goal was for no incident to happen. And this was celebrated any month that was incident free. I'm sure that that organization, so that's in the chat window, I'm sure that that organization would have had an incident response plan. Celebrating that an incident hasn't happened each month is one thing, but to not have an incident response plan is a different thing entirely. So I think that, yes, it's worth celebrating when an incident hasn't happened, that doesn't happen or hasn't happened each month, but I'm sure that they would have had an incident response plan. And yes, it is a goal. It should be a goal for there to be 0 events or 0 incidents each month. There's nothing wrong in that being a goal. And it's good if that goal is consistently achieved. That's fantastic. However, still remain prepared. So which of the following are not typically involved. Yeah, thank you, T-Boy. Thank you. Which one of these is not typically involved in incident detection? Yep, and that is correct. The majority have got that right. D, it's the regulators. Users are involved in incident detection, and it's each user, each employee's responsibility to raise issues or risks or incidents to the relevant stakeholders in line with policy. All of the following are important ways to practice an organization's disaster recovery effort. Which one is the most important? Okay, is it? What is disaster recovery, please? If we type in the group chat, what is the difference between what is the difference between disaster recovery and business continuity? If we type the difference in the group chat there, we're actually going to finish at about 5:35 because there's another workshop coming up. So we'll finish at 5:35. But anyone cite the difference between business continuity and disaster recovery? Anyone know the difference? Happy for people to type the difference in the chat window. Business continuity, disaster recovery. Yeah, DR is about the IT systems. What is business continuity about? Yep, that's it in a nutshell. Thank you, Olusegun. You said that business continuity is for critical and business activities, whereas DR is about IT, about getting systems up and running, whereas business continuity is about critical business services and operations. And what sort of things might cause a business interruption? For years, I worked in a company where, as part of the SMT, we were responsible for creating business continuity plans. The organization had a single business continuity plan, and we all contributed to it, all the different heads from the different departments. But what are some of the business interruptions that we may have prepared for at the time? Okay, yep. Weather, what else? We actually planned, yep, pandemic, natural disasters, terrorist attack, but ironically, we planned then for SARS. SARS, that is, I mean, at the time there was this SARS and swine flu thing. So we planned for a pandemic. How will the business continue to operate in the event of a pandemic? Not knowing that about 5 years or so later, the world would go through COVID. So business continuity is about planning for, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, pandemics, anything that could affect the critical business's services. Whereas disaster recovery is about anything that could impact on the systems within the organization, the IT operations within an organization. Okay, so what have we said is the answer to this question? All of the following are important ways to practice an organization disaster recovery effort. Which one is the most important? Practice restoring data from backups, facility evacuation drills, desktop tabletop testing of the plan, or running the alternate operating site to determine if it could handle critical functions in times of emergency. And whilst I recognize that everybody wrote the answer as D, and I've just seen an answer A, why is B the answer? And we can see why, because I've now moved down to the actual answer and the explanation. Why is B the only correct answer? Because remember, about 2 questions ago, we saw that the most important thing that a business needs to be concerned about is the health and safety of their employees. So when practicing a disaster recovery effort, health and human safety is the most important thing. Making sure, for example, that your employees, that they're able to get out of server rooms if they're in a data center. Your IT privileged users or your IT engineers, they're in a data center and they're locked in. So health and human safety, that is the most important thing. Health and human safety, it's B. That's why that's B. What is the risk associated with resuming full normal operations too soon after a DR effort, after disaster recovery effort? Okay, regulators might disapprove, the organization could save money, which it can't be. Investors might be upset if you resume normal operations too soon, or the danger posed by the disaster might still be present. That answer is clear and we're already receiving responses. The answer to that is A. True or false? Business continuity planning is a reactive procedure that restores business operations after a disruption occurs. True or false? Okay, so we've got, we seem to have, yep. Okay, so can we type true or false, please, so that I know where the answers are actually starting from? False, false, false. Everyone's really, yeah, really quite smart on this one. What is false about this answer? If we type in the, what is false about this response, about that statement? It says true or false. Business continuity planning is a reactive procedure that restores operations after a disruption occurs. That is fantastic. T-Boy's got it spot on there. It is not reactive. You don't do your business continuity planning after. It's a proactive procedure. So what you're doing is that you're planning before a business disruption occurs. It's a proactive measure. So the question is asking, is it a reactive procedure that restores business operations after disruption occurs? But the single response there is that it is actually proactive. You're not planning after a disaster or a business interruption. You're actually planning before business operation, business interruption. Yeah, proactive preparation. That's what it says in the answer there. Okay, Bruce is the branch manager of a bank, wants to determine which staff at the branch can get access to systems and under which conditions they can get access. Which access control methodology would allow Bruce to make this determination? And under which conditions they can get access? So branch manager of a branch Bruce wants to determine which staff at the branch can get access to systems. So it will be Bruce's responsibility to determine who gets access to the systems or not. Let me just go up a bit. So what type of control would allow Bruce to make this determination? Is it mandatory access control? Is it discretionary access control? Is it defense in depth, or is it role-based access control? Most of us have said role-based access control. And role-based access control is when you determine permissions based on a person's role, as in, this is what this person's role is. So it doesn't need a manager to come and say, well, okay, I'll decide whether this person has access or not. That is what role-based access control is. You're either a member of the finance team that has access to that system, or you're not a member of the finance team. So you don't have access to the system. That is role-based access control. However, what this question is asking is that Bruce, branch manager, they want to be the person that determines who gets access to what system and under what the conditions they can get access. And so what they would be doing there is it would be up to Bruce's discretion, which is what makes the answer discretionary access control. Now, please, can we put in the chat window if that explanation was clear, or whether you would like me to just explain that one more time? So please put it in the chat window. Type in the chat window, please explain one more time. Thank you. And I'll explain, okay, you need clarification. Thank you so much. Yeah, let me just explain, because one person has asked for clarification. Please let me just explain again. With role-based access control, what you're doing is you're saying that you're assigning access based on a person's role in the company. So a role could be finance. You could be a finance administrator. You could be an HR administrator. You could be an IT administrator. So what we're saying here is that the role you play in the organization would determine your permissions. If you're not a member of the HR administration team, then you don't get access to the HR folder. If you're not a member of the finance administration team, you don't get access to the finance folder. That is role-based, based on your role. However, discretionary access control, the question here is that they're saying Bruce wants to be the person that determines what staff gets access to what system. So they're effectively trying to say that Bruce wants it to be up to his discretion, his discretion as to who gets access to what. And that is discretionary access control. Now, T-Boys asked the question, would this mean extra permissions besides the staff already having role-based access control? This is a scenario. So I wouldn't know whether they're saying in addition or not, but the question is simple here. It's asking, Bruce wants to be the person that determines which staff get access to what and under what conditions, in which case he's saying that he wants it to be up to his discretion. So whether that then means that they've already got a role-based access control in place or not too sure. However, the question is simply asking which one of these access control methods would allow Bruce to determine who gets access to what. And the answer is actually in the, he wants to determine. So he wants to make the decision based at his discretion. T-Boys asks, No. So let's just go back here. So Laulu has asked if Bruce gets the discretionary access control, then what does what does the staff get? The point is that Bruce would be an administrator of the systems, and then it'd be up to Bruce to determine what files each user accesses. So that's what the question is asking. If Bruce is the administrator, systems administrator now, Bruce is then determining. I know it's saying that Bruce is the branch manager, but they may only have one system on site actually. And if they've got one system on site, if it's a small bank, they've got one system on site, they may not have an IT team, in which case they're saying, Bruce, it will be the responsibility of the branch manager to determine who gets access to what files and folders on that single system. So Bruce would have not only the administrator privileges, but Bruce would also be able to configure the system and say, Laulu can have access to the finance folders. T-Boy can have access to the HR folders and the finance folders. But it's up to the manager's discretion. And HP Folio and T-Boys asked, is this advisable in practice? It depends. I've just given an example of where a company doesn't have an administrator. They've got a very small LAN network, local area network, just within that branch. They've got one server. They've got 5 staff or something like that. So it just depends. And I've answered the question, would this not require the approval from Bruce's manager? Again, the question isn't talking about, all of that in terms of approvals. The question hasn't said anything about, is this a big bank or is it a small bank? It's just saying that Bruce wants to determine this and what sort of access control would allow Bruce to make this determination. They've given us they've given us 3 possible answers, because when we say Bruce could have mandatory access control, mandatory access control is usually for systems. Mandatory access control is for things like if you've got backup software, for example, and you make someone a backup administrator, then they would have access to all the folders that need backing up, that are in the backup software that have been configured to be backed up. But let's not try and get too deep into this. A backup software must have access to all the files to be able to back up all those files. So that is an example of mandatory access control. But that's something totally separate to discretionary access control. What we're asking now is what permissions, what access control methodology would allow Bruce to determine who gets access to what? And the simple answer is discretionary access control. Mandatory access control is for systems that need to, for example, operate the print queue. You could have a print operator. You could have an Active Directory domain admin, for example, which would automatically give them permissions to everything on the domain. But that's not what the question is asking us. It's simply asking us which of these different access control methods would allow Bruce to be able to determine who gets access to what. Right, a human guard monitoring a hidden camera could be considered what type of control? Now, that's another tricky one. Detective control, preventive control. Well, not tricky as in the previous one wasn't tricky, but this is tricky in that could be detective, preventive, deterrent, or a logical control. So I've had CA, okay, why is it not C? And okay, and I've also had B. I've had A, I've had B. Why is it not C, first of all? Because I know, I think I saw C earlier. Exactly, because it's hidden. So it's not deterrent. Exactly, because what he's doing is not visual. So thanks for that. So it's not, that's not a deterrent. They're actually trying to detect any hidden activity. They're not preventing anything because, again, they're not visible. A human guard that is visible could serve as a preventive control or even a deterrent. But the fact that the camera is hidden and the human guard is simply monitoring that camera, that is really, the human guard is trying to do what? They're trying to detect activity. So that is a detective control. Okay, which of the following is a biometric access control mechanism? A badge reader, a copper key, a fence with razor tape on it, or a door locked by a voice print identifier? Which of these are biometric access control mechanisms? Yep, the fact that it's got a voice print identifier makes it, it's controlled by voice. That makes it a biometric access control mechanism. In order for a biometric security to function properly, an authorized person's physiological data must be broadcast, stored, deleted, or modified. Yep, so we've all got that one that is stored. The information must be stored. And for those of us who are aware of information privacy laws, like the GDPR, if you process biometric data, that means that you're actually processing sensitive data or a special category of data that requires real stringent measures to secure that beyond normal data. So definitely be there. Now let's go to Gary is unable to log on to the production environment, has tried 3 times and then is logged out of trying again for 1 hour. Why? Why have they been logged out for 1 hour? Please, could you kindly mute yourself? And then let's see whether it is C or D, please. And please, could we kindly all mute ourselves? Thank you. Okay, what I'll try and do is just see who is unmuted and I'll just help them to mute themselves. Okay. All right, so the majority of us have said D, that Gary's actions look like an attack. So the answer could have been C if we'd been asked to choose 2 options. but the system is trying to give them time to remember their credentials. But the most, the best answer here is that the system thinks that somebody is trying to hack into the system, and so it's locked them out for 1 hour. And that's been configured by the systems administrators to make sure that if they don't remember their password in an hour, they try again and they keep getting locked out. But the system thinks that looks like an attack, and so they're they're actually locked out. Visitors to a secure facility need to be controlled. Controls useful for managing visitors include all of the following except sign-in sheet and tracking log, fence, badges that differ from employee badges or receptionists. Which one of these isn't a control useful for managing visitors? Okay, we've had a few answers. B. Why is a fence not a useful control for managing visitors? Why is the fence not a useful control? Well, it's definitely the correct answer because you don't want your visitors clamoring over a fence to get into your facility. So yes, of course, you produce or you provide sign-in sheets and tracking logs. You provide badges that differ from employee badges. And then, so you've got a different color. And so that means that everyone can identify that that's a visitor. Then you have your receptionist, of course. Yes, and of course, a fence restricts everyone, including your employees. Prachi works as a database administrator for Trifid Inc. Prachi is allowed to add or delete users, but is not allowed to read or modify the data in the database itself. When Prachi logs on to the system, an access control list checks to determine which permissions Prachi has. In this situation, what is the database? And Prachi is actually logging on to the object because I can see that, I've actually shown the answer here. Prachi is logging on to the object. That is a database. Why is the answer not the rule? If we can type in the chat window, please. Why is the correct answer not the rule? Why is the database not the rule? What is the rule here, actually? Where is the rule contained in this paragraph? The rule. Where is the rule contained? Where does absolutely, thank you, Ron. The rule is stored in the access control list. So when Prachi logs onto the system, the access control list contains the rule that this is Prachi's name. That is, Prachi is the subject actually in this question. Prachi is the subject. The access control then contains the rule that this subject is allowed to add or delete users, but is not allowed to read or modify the data in this object. So the question is, in this situation, what is the database? The database is the object. Prachi is the subject, and the access control list contains the rules. Okay. Now we've got Handel is a senior manager at and is in charge of implementing the new access control for the scheme and wants to ensure that employees transfer from one department to another, getting promoted or cross-training or new cross-transferring, I think this should be, to new positions, can get access to the different assets they'll need for their new positions in the most efficient manner. Now, I can see that we've all seen that the answer is what? Role-based access control. And again, as I said previously, role-based access control is where you set up different organization units or OUs. That's what they're referred to in Active Directory. You create OUs, organization units or containers for different groups, different departments, different teams. And then rather than applying permissions to each user that joins your organization, if you've got 10,000 staff in your organization, for example, it's of no benefit to keep applying permissions to each new user that joins the business. So instead, what systems administrators do is that they create organization units, one for finance, or maybe multiple ones for finance because of the different teams within finance, but let's just say one for finance, one for HR, one for IT, one for marketing. And then as soon as a new member of staff joins, they put them into the right OU. Rather than giving them OU permissions, the permissions to each file or each department's folders separately. And then when they leave, they simply have to remove them from that OU rather than going to look through their user account to see how many different permissions they have. Now, one of the issues that some organizations may face is whereby, and I'll ask us a question based on this in a moment. One of the issues that organizations face is that when a staff member transfers to another department, sometimes IT forgets to remove them from their old organizational unit, OU, before putting them in a new OU. And so they end up with, okay, Adeolu's saying this happens a lot. Yes, it does happen a lot. And one of the things, sorry, before I say one of the things that we can do about it, my question is, what is that referred to as when you don't remove somebody's old permissions and you simply add them to another group and you leave them with positions that they don't have any right to retain anymore? What is that called? You leave them with privileges. Maybe I'll use the word privileges to help us to find the right answer. So there's a term for that. When somebody has, okay, we're getting close. It's definitely nothing to do with scope creep or anything. What is it called? Okay, so we're getting close there actually. What is it called when somebody, and we're getting even closer, what is it called when somebody has more privileges than they actually need? Okay, it starts with an E, but that's not the word. Not elevated, but close. We're getting really close. Not elevation, not elevated privileges. What is that word? There is a word, and I think we've actually referred to that word in something else in another question earlier. Not enhanced privileges, escalated privileges. So they have escalated privileges. They have more privileges than is required for them to do their job. Okay, so that is something to watch out for if we're working in an organization as an IT administrator or systems administrator or domain administrator role. We just need to be a bit careful in terms of how we actually assign privileges to movers in particular, and that we make sure that when someone leaves, that we actually also remember to terminate all their access to their account, including in the cloud. Okay, now let's just move down a bit because I think I've scrolled up. Okay. Prachi works as a, have we done that one? Okay. Yep. So Prachi works as a database admin, allowed to add or delete users, but not allowed to read or modify the data in the database itself. And then that is referred to as least privilege, where she only has the privileges required to do her job. Now, Larry and Fern both work in the data center. In order to enter the data center to begin their workday, they must both present their own keys, which are different to the key reader before the door to the data center opens. Which security concept is being applied in this situation? Is that defense in depth, segregation of duties? Is that least privilege, or is that dual control? We'll just hasten up a bit. Okay, so we've got D, dual control, yep. That's where two people, each with distinct authentication factors, must be present to perform a function. That is dual, that is two people with distinct authentication factors. So their authentication keys are different. Dual control. Prachi works as database admin. Prachi is allowed to add or delete users, but not allowed to read or modify the database itself. When Prachi logs onto the system, an access control list checks to determine which permissions Prachi has. And we've said that is the rule. The access control list is the rule. Prachi herself is the subject. And the object is the database. Which of the following is probably most useful at the perimeter of a property? A safe, a fence, a data center, a centralized log storage facility, and that's clearly a fence. Cleaner is a database manager allowed to add new users to the database, remove current users, and create new usage functions for the users. Cleaner is not allowed to read the data in the fields of the database itself. This is an example of what? So not allowed to read the data in the fields of the database itself because they're a database manager. That is their responsibility, the database manager, but they're not allowed to do anything else. Okay, very good question there. Okay, well, let's just answer this. So that is, of course, role-based access control. So because Cleaner is a database manager, that is what they've been given permissions to do according to their role. The role of database manager is allowed to add new users, remove current users, and create new usage functions, but they're not allowed to read the data in the fields of the database because it's not their data. Now, what is the difference between least privilege and role-based access control? They are interrelated, those two concepts, but least privilege is saying you're simply giving people the least permissions that they need to do their job. No more, no less. It is related to role-based access control in that role-based access control gives you permissions according to your role. But you may have multiple roles in a company. So you may belong to finance, that your hiring group may be finance, and then you belong to purchase ledger, vault ledger, accounts, or you may simply belong to purchase ledger and the finance team. So it is really interlinked. Least privilege is simply saying you're given the minimum permissions to do your job. Role-based access control is giving you the minimum permissions dependent on your role. If you have different roles, you get the access that you need to do your job. So if you have different roles, you get access to the different functions, data that you need to do your job, but it will still be the least privileges that you need. So let's say you're the, yeah. So if you have different roles, then you get more than one access because you need to be able to do your job. You must be able to do your job, so you'll get whatever you need to perform your role. And that may mean that you're actually put not only in the finance group, but in the HR group and in other groups. Let's say you're the chief operating officer, for example, and the chief operating officer may need access to many different groups. So of course, they would be given the least permissions that they need to do their job, the least privileges that they need to do their job, but those least privileges may go spread across having permission to some HR folders and to some finance folders and to some marketing folders as the COO. So whatever you need to do your job is exactly what you'll be given, but you'll be given the least that you need to do your jobs. Just because, let's say the COO now, the Chief Operating Officer, they may need access to the financial statements folder, for example, but they might not need access to credit cards data, for example, in which case they don't get that access. So that is what we refer to as least privilege, because they're given access to some finance files, which they need to conduct their role, but they're not given access to everything just because they're working in that capacity. They get the least privileges that they need to do their job. Okay, senior manager Trifid, in charge of implementing a new access control scheme for the company, wants to ensure that operational managers have the utmost personal choice in determining which employees get access, which method should Handel select. So we've had this before. It's discretionary. Yep. Discretionary. If you want a choice, if you want the managers to have a choice to determine who gets what, then that's at their discretion. Which of the following would be considered a logical access control? Sorry, logical access control. What is D, first of all? What is D? A chain attached to a laptop. What sort of control is that? Is that a physical control, logical access control, technical control, biometric control? So D is a physical control. What is A? What is A? Thank you. So D is physical, definitely. What is A? What is A and B, actually? Yep, so those are biometric controls. Yep, what you are, biometric controls. what about a fingerprint reader? And so this question I would actually answer by process of elimination. The fact that you know that a chain attached to a laptop is a physical control. Then now you've got A and B, which are the same. It's saying an iris reader that allows an employee to enter a controlled area, or a fingerprint reader. Yeah, it's a biometric control, but it's also, it's not a logical control, because what I'm trying to get at here is that A and B are the same. An iris reader that allows an employee to enter a controlled area, and a fingerprint reader that allows an employee to enter a controlled area rather. So if both of those are saying to enter a controlled area, you've now got this one that allows an employee to access a laptop computer. Logical access controls, that is who can access a system or a device, a printer, for example. Whereas when we're talking about an area, they're actually saying that the reader, so this reader here is a physical control. A physical control limits physical access. It's the reader actually here. So whilst it's using biometrics, it's actually a physical control, and it's limiting access to a controlled area. Whereas this is a logical control, because it is still a reader, but it's allowing an employee to access a computer, a device, a system. Does that make sense, or should I explain that again? And we've got about 15 minutes. So should I explain that again, or does that make sense to us? It's clear, okay? So logical access controls enable us to access a computer. Oh, yeah, when you say the computer is physical, they're not asking for the device itself. So they're not asking for what the device itself is. They're saying, okay, let me just briefly explain that again. An iris reader and a fingerprint reader, they're actually physical controls, because they're allowing access to an area. A chain attached to a lap computer is a physical control, again, because it's allowing access to a computer, but it's a physical device. Whereas the fact that this fingerprint reader is a physical device still makes it a logical control. So it's a physical device. But what makes it a logical control is the fact that it's provided. What makes it an access, logical access, is the fact that it's allowing access to a system, not to an area. No, we won't get into whether a system can be logged in physically or logically. What we're trying to say here is that the reader is a logical way of accessing a laptop computer or a system or a device. A fingerprint reader is a logical method of accessing a device or a system, whereas a reader, the same reader that enables us to enter a controlled area, means that it's a physical access control. So yeah, T-Boy's point there is correct, that a computer can be logged in physically or logically, but for the purpose of this, logical access controls limit who can access a device or a system, whereas physical access controls limit physical access to areas or assets. Now let's go to Jelby, is a technical support analyst for Trifid Inc. Sometimes and they're sometimes required to install or remove software. Which of the following could be used to describe their account? That is a privileged access account. Anyone that works in IT that has administrative permissions, for example, then that is where they have permissions that are not the norm for day-to-day users, then that means that they've got privileged. That is a privileged account. Privileged account, IT. Okay, logical access controls can protect the IT environment perfectly. There is no means or to deploy any other controls. Actually, now this question, it's really simple. It says, which of the following statements is true? Anything that says there's no means to deploy any other controls is incorrect. The answer here is it's best to use a blend of controls in order to provide optimum security. And what is that called, please, when we use a blend of controls, multiple controls? What is the term for that, please? If we can put the name for that in our chat group, what is it called when we use multiple types of controls? Close. Close, but not correct. Absolutely, Abel has got it correct, so I'll just keep it at that. Defense in depth. That's what we're doing when we're using multiple controls. We're implementing defense in depth. Multiple layers of controls. Where we're saying multi-factor authentication, we're saying that we're authenticating to a network using various methods of authentication. Whereas defensive in depth is where we're using multiple layers of controls to provide optimum security. So thank you for that. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to stop in a minute and give us room for questions for 5 minutes, and then I need to dash to set up this platform again for the next workshop that's starting at 6 o'clock, and that is for the Scrum Masters, and it won't be through this login, of course. So if you received an email about the Scrum Masters workshop, please, you'd need to sign out of here now. Let's just answer this last question. So inbound traffic from an external source seems to indicate much higher rates of communication than normal, to the point where the internal systems might be overwhelmed. Which security solution can often identify and potentially counter this risk? Well, it's your firewall. So we're talking about inbound traffic on your network. And that's what your firewall does. It monitors inbound traffic, and you can actually close ports. I know we were talking about ports. It may have been before we joined this workshop, before you joined, when I was talking to Mr. Lalekon. I was talking about, ports. He was talking about, questions, the sort of questions, not the actual questions that came from actually was talking about the syllabus of the ISC squared, when I was asking him to try and help me to align my slides with excuse me, please, could you kindly mute yourself? Thank you. When I was asking him to mute, so he talked about the fact that in this syllabus there are something about ports, about the 15 most common ports or something like that. So what a firewall does is that you can actually enable, as a network administrator or network security or cybersecurity administrator or engineer, you can actually open up ports and block ports. You can even do it on your workstation, on your laptop, where you actually look for Windows firewall. If you use Windows 10 or 11 or whatever system you're using, and you can actually go in, just search for firewall on your Windows bar, search for firewall, and it will come up with your Windows firewall. Or you can go into control panel, and then you can just look around and see the ports that are open in your firewall. And if you block a certain port, if you block port 25, for example, that is for SMTP traffic, you won't be able to receive emails or send out outgoing emails, rather. That's SMTP port 25. DNS as well, that has its own port number. HTTP has its own port number. HTTPS has its own port number. So everything that goes through your system, in and out of your system, comes through, through a port with its own defined port number. And of course, this question is asking, how can you identify what traffic is coming through and flooding your systems, and how can you potentially counter the risk? What you would do is that you could then block the port. You identify the port number, the sort of traffic that's coming through. If it is SMTP traffic, if it's FTP traffic that you're being flooded with, then you can simply block that port for FTP traffic, and it will stop that traffic from coming through on the firewall though. Right, so I'm going to stop the workshop, and I'm just going to ask if we've briefly got any questions. And then what I'll do is that I'll then have to stop, as I said, because we've got another workshop shortly starting. I'm not actually delivering that workshop, but we do have to stop so that we can give our Scrum Masters the opportunity to resume their session.